Alright. Hey there, Parklandberryites. Cedric here with another video blog from what we discussed in class this week. There was an interesting point that was brought up as we closed out Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, namely the idea of irreversible versus unfair in regards to the fact that Barthes spends a good portion of the second half of the book trying to cope with his mother's passing. Now, it's interesting that Bart had to elaborate on the photographic points before he went into what was basically the main impetus behind Camera Lucida, and that was he was always trying to search for his mother. He was trying to, I shouldn't say always, but he was searching for his mother through photography, trying to find some semblance that would make her live again. Now, Professor Lundberry had discussed earlier about the idea that it was irreversible what had happened, that Barthes was essentially trying to reattach the umbilical cord by finding aspects of his mother in these photographs. For example, Barthes relates his elation about the fact that he saw his mother again in the Winter Garden photograph, which we were denied seeing because of the fact that we wouldn't get it. And I don't know if that was related to the studium or the punctum, but it's obvious that in this mysterious photograph, Barthes found something related in that photograph that tickled his own studium, but also he found something within the punctum that he wanted to withhold from us, which I also found very interesting because there's many photographs that I went through and have taken myself that when I look back on them, there's an interesting mixture of the two that most people tend not to understand, but I get unless I actually point it out to them. Which also relates to the fact that, as Bart says, photography has been tamed by both becoming artful and by banality. It's not something that the artists themselves have, how should I put this? It's not something that the artists it's not new and wild anymore. I think the example that Professor Lundberry used was rock and roll music, which started out as this wild, rebellious, sexually erotic thing in the 1950s, but has become tame and safe in a 50-year lifespan, which is a fairly interesting comparison to make because photography, in looking at a lot of the early photographs, it has shown itself to sort of have a slow evolution down into where it has become very banal. And with that in mind, it's hard to actually get back to the wild roots of the early photographs by Daguerre, for example, or the spookiness of his daguerreotype, which in its own way had a very ominous tone to him. For example, for me, whenever I look at a daguerreotype photograph, I always think of the first presidents that were actually ever photographed, namely John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, the sixth and seventh presidents respectively. There's something very haunting about seeing two former presidents, the first presidents to actually be photographed, but they were out of office when this happened, when they were actually photographed. So I guess technically the first sitting president would be, well, that's beside the point. The point is that there's something very haunting about these early images of the two, particularly in the fact when you look at the photograph of Jackson, who was 78 when he took the picture, when he sat for the picture, I should say. He was just about a month or so away from death. So you can see the battle lines in his eye, in his face, because you can draw a lot about Andrew Jackson just from his photographs, more so than you can with John Quincy Adams, who has a sort of statesman-like pose, whereas Jackson is more. It's almost as if Jackson wants to, I don't know. There's almost a unhidden wildness in Jackson's photograph than there is in John Quincy Adams'. I'll probably have to elaborate on that point at a later date. There's also the idea that was brought up when Kristen brought in her photograph of her and her father. The idea that photographs give us the opportunity to lie to ourselves, and we tend to make up elements of our past to go along with the picture. Now, for me, there are elements in the picture that I remember from certain instances, like when my cousin had fallen off a slide at Wild Adventures. That I don't make that story up whenever I show the picture. But there are also some photographs that I don't really know the story behind that I've forgotten, so it does me no good to actually make up those stories. Case in point, when I realized that there are very few photographs of me and my own father. Like, I can remember more about taking a picture with my mother than I do my own father. For example, and I hope this can actually be seen here, from the old family album. If not, I'll have to bring it a little bit better. But here's me. I'm guessing I was about maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years old, and my mom's here in the corner right here, and we were living in our granddad's house. The reason I know that is because of the chair that she's sitting in, which he did not get rid of until a few years later. But what I always find, what stimulates my own punctum whenever I see this particular photograph, isn't so there's not a whole lot that would interest somebody else, but for me, what I find always interesting about this photograph is that, unlike Forrest, I have such vivid memories of my mom that I don't need to seek out photographs of her to make her live again. But in a way, this image here from when she was much younger and when I was just still really little, has a does bring back memories because I see the same smile that she had, her hair being not combed neatly because that was her in her element. Whenever she didn't have to do anything on the weekends or after work, she'd always just be relaxed and do whatever. That's what stimulates my thinking the most about this picture, what I attach to in my own memories. So it shows that I don't really need to seek out the photograph in order to make her come alive for me again. But as far as going over the idea of photographs lying, I think that that's more subjective, in that the true in that we do that photographs tend to bury the truth more than they should, but also at the same time they also have a sense of revelation about them, that even if you were to tell a story, there's also other elements that are hidden. I hope to come across this point a lot better as we move forward into the class. But till next time, thank you.